My name is Nadia Beaumont and I am 36 years old. 14 months ago, my older brother stood at the front of a county courthouse in Savannah, Georgia, and submitted a petition to have my name removed from the deed of the house where I grew up. The house where our mother had lived alone for 6 years. The house I had quietly maintained, repaired, and paid the property taxes on every single year since our father died. He brought a notary. He brought a lawyer. He brought our mother, who sat in a chair by the window and did not look at me once. What he did not bring was the truth. And the truth was this: my mother had signed a document 8 years earlier, witnessed by 2 people and filed with the county clerk, that made any transfer of that property conditional on my written consent. My name was already on that deed. My brother did not know about the second document. Neither did the lawyer he'd hired for $400 an hour. Neither did my mother, who had signed the first document in a fog of grief and then, over the years, allowed herself to forget it entirely. But I knew. I had known for 8 years, because the woman who made sure I knew was my grandmother, Odette Beaumont, who passed away on a Tuesday in March, 22 months before that courthouse morning, and who had spent the last decade of her life making sure that when this moment came, and she had always believed it would come, I would be standing on solid ground. Before I tell you what happened when the clerk pulled up that second filing, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if this story speaks to you. And drop your city and what time it is where you are in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to Savannah, Georgia, to the summer I turned 19, to a kitchen that smelled like bacon grease and old wood, and to the first time I understood that in my family, love had a hierarchy, and I was not at the top of it. My father, Curtis Beaumont, drove a delivery truck for a regional food distributor for 31 years. My mother, Paulette, worked the front desk at a dental office on Abercorn Street until her knees gave out. We were not poor, but we were careful. Every dollar had a destination before it arrived. The house on Forsyth Lane was a 3-bedroom Craftsman my grandfather had bought in 1961 for $11,000. By the time I was growing up in it, the porch sagged on one side and the kitchen faucet dripped a slow, patient rhythm that my father never quite got around to fixing. But it was ours, and I loved it the way you love things that are imperfect and permanent. My brother Garrett is 5 years older than me. He is the kind of man who has always known how to be in a room, how to fill it, how to command it, how to make people feel that his attention is a gift. He was the first person in our family to go to college, and my parents treated that fact the way some families treat a military commission or a religious calling. There was a framed photograph of Garrett in his Georgia Southern graduation gown on the living room mantel from the day he graduated until the day my father died. There was no photograph of me. I am not saying this to draw sympathy. I am saying it because it is the truth, and because the truth of how love is distributed inside a family is something that takes years to name clearly. When I graduated from Armstrong State University in 2011 with a degree in accounting, my mother made a pound cake. That was the celebration. A pound cake on the kitchen counter, a card from Walgreens, and my father saying, "You did good, Nadia," in the same tone he used when the Braves won a close game. Garrett's graduation had been a dinner at a restaurant on River Street, 14 people, a cake from a bakery, and a weekend trip to Atlanta that my parents talked about for 2 years afterward. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I was practical, that I did not need the fuss. I was good at telling myself things. What I was actually good at was numbers. I had been good at numbers since the 3rd grade, when my teacher, Mrs. Prentice, called my mother to say that I was working 3 grade levels ahead in mathematics and she thought I should be tested for the advanced program. My mother thanked her and told her that Garrett had always been the academic one in the family, and that she'd keep an eye on me. I was never tested. I taught myself. My grandmother Odette was my father's mother. She had lived in a small apartment on the east side of Savannah since my grandfather passed in 1994, and every Sunday after church, my father drove us over for lunch. Odette made rice and red beans and a sweet potato pie that I have never tasted the equal of anywhere in my life. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair she kept pinned close to her head and hands that moved constantly, always working, always building something even when she was sitting still. Odette noticed me. That is the simplest way to say it. She noticed the way I added up the grocery receipt in my head before the cashier finished ringing. She noticed when I corrected a math error in the church bulletin and slid it quietly back into the pew rack without saying anything. She noticed that I read the business section of the newspaper while Garrett and my cousins watched football in the next room. One Sunday, when I was about 11, she sat down beside me at the kitchen table while I was working through a word problem in a library book I'd checked out on my own. She looked at the problem for a long moment, then looked at me. "You see the shape of it," she said. "Not just the numbers. The shape underneath." I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I remembered it. When I was 19 and had just started my 2nd year at Armstrong, my father had his first heart attack. It was mild, the doctors said. A warning. He needed to slow down, change his diet, reduce stress. He did none of those things, because Curtis Beaumont did not know how to slow down, and because slowing down would have meant confronting the fact that he was 61 years old and the house needed a new roof and Garrett had borrowed $4,000 2 years earlier that had never been repaid. That was the year I started doing the family's finances. Not because anyone asked me to. Because I could see the shape of it, the shape underneath, and what I saw was a slow, quiet emergency that no one else was looking at directly. I sat down with my father one Saturday morning in October. I had a yellow legal pad and a calculator. I showed him where the money was going, where it could go differently, what would happen to the house if the property taxes fell behind. He listened. He did not say much. But at the end, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "Where did you learn to do all this?" "From watching," I said. He nodded slowly. "Your grandmother does that too." That was the closest my father ever came to telling me I was like her. Garrett came home for Thanksgiving that year with a woman named Brenly and a business idea he wanted my father to invest in. A sports bar near the Savannah airport. He had a prospectus printed at Kinko's, spiral bound, with a color cover. My father listened to the whole presentation at the dining room table while my mother refilled everyone's sweet tea and nodded along. When Garrett finished, my father said, "How much do you need to get started?" Garrett said $15,000. My father said he'd think about it. I sat at the far end of the table and did not say anything. I had looked at the prospectus while Garrett was in the bathroom. The projected revenue numbers were not based on anything real. The lease cost for the property he'd identified would consume 60% of the projected first-year income. There was no contingency line. There was no mention of the liquor license timeline, which in Georgia could run 6 to 8 months and required a separate application fee. I did not say any of this. Not at the table, not that night. But 2 days later, when my father and I were alone in the kitchen and he asked me what I thought, I told him. He invested $8,000. Not 15. He told Garrett the rest was tied up. The sports bar opened in April of the following year and closed 11 months later. Garrett never repaid the $8,000. My father never asked for it back. And from that point forward, there was a coldness in the way Garrett looked at me that I recognized even if I could never prove its source. I graduated, passed my CPA exam on the first attempt, and took a position at a small accounting firm in Savannah. My father died on a Wednesday in February, 4 years later, of his second heart attack. He was 65 years old. I was 23. The week after the funeral, Garrett drove down from Atlanta, where he had been living since the bar closed, and sat at the kitchen table with my mother and talked about the house. I was in the next room. I could hear every word. "Mama, you can't keep this place up on your own," Garrett said. "It needs work. The roof, the HVAC, all of it. I've been looking at some options." My mother made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite resistance. "I think we should look at refinancing," Garrett said. "Pull some equity out, get the repairs done, and then down the road, when you're ready to think about something smaller, we'll have options." "Your daddy always said the house stays in the family," my mother said. "It will stay in the family, Mama. I'm family." I walked into the kitchen. I stood in the doorway. Garrett looked at me the way he always looked at me when I interrupted something he was arranging, the way you look at weather that has arrived inconveniently. "I can handle the repairs," I said. "I've already priced the roof. I can manage the taxes and the maintenance going forward." Garrett smiled. "Nadia, you're just starting out. You don't need to take that on." "I want to." My mother looked between us. Then she looked at her hands. "We'll figure it out," she said. That was the end of that conversation. But it was not the end of anything else. I want to pause here for a moment, because I know some of you watching this right now have been in that kitchen. Not that exact kitchen, but one like it. The one where someone is making decisions about something that belongs to your whole family, and you can see exactly what's happening, and you say something, and you are smiled at and redirected and made to feel like the person who doesn't understand the bigger picture. when the truth is that you understand it better than anyone in the room. If you know that feeling, if you have ever been the one in the doorway who got smiled past, drop the word doorway in the comments. I want to know you're there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. These stories are for you. Now, back to where we were. 2 weeks after that conversation, I went to see my grandmother Odette. It was a Sunday, which was when I always went. She had her rice and beans on the stove and her sweet potato pie cooling on the counter, and she poured us both coffee and sat across from me at her small kitchen table and waited. She always waited. She never asked what was wrong. She just made space until I was ready to put it into words. I told her about Garrett's proposal, about the refinancing idea, about my mother's silence. Odette listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your daddy put your name on that deed 2 years ago." I looked at her. "He didn't tell you," she said. It was not a question. No. She nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she had already suspected. He meant to. He kept meaning to. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Curtis was not a man who found it easy to say the things he meant. You know that. I know. He came to me when he got sick the second time. After the first scare. He was worried about the house. About what would happen. She paused. He was worried about Garrett. I sat very still. I helped him file the deed transfer, she said. Your name is on it, jointly with your mother. That means nothing can be done with that property without your signature. No refinancing. No sale. Nothing. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. He loved you, Nadia. He just didn't always know how to show it in the ways that counted. But he knew what he was doing when he put your name on that paper. I did not cry. I sat at that table and felt something shift inside me, something that had been braced for a long time slowly releasing, and I did not cry. Does Garrett know? I asked. No. Your mother may not even remember. She signed the paperwork, but she was grieving and she had a lot on her mind. The filing is with the county clerk. It's real. It's recorded. She squeezed my hand once, then let go and stood up to check her beans. There's something else, she said, her back to me. I've written some things down. Instructions. For when I'm gone and for if things get complicated. I've left them with my attorney, a woman named Cecile Trahan. You'll hear from her when the time comes. Grandma. Don't argue with me. She turned around, and her eyes were steady and warm and entirely without fear. I have lived long enough to know that the people who need protecting rarely know they need it until the moment arrives. I am simply making sure the moment finds you ready. She died 22 months before the courthouse morning. Pancreatic cancer, the same as her husband before her. She was 81 years old. I held her hand at the end, in a hospice room that smelled of lavender and clean linen, and she did not say anything in those last hours, but she held on with a grip that surprised me for someone so small, and I understood it as the last thing she had to give me. 3 days after the funeral, Cecile Trahan called me. She was a woman in her late 60s with a voice like a closing argument, unhurried, precise, and absolutely certain of itself. She told me that Odette had left me a sealed envelope and a set of instructions, and that I should come to her office at my convenience. I went the next morning. The envelope contained a handwritten letter on Odette's personal stationery, cream paper with a small blue flower in the corner, the kind she had always used for important correspondence, and a certified copy of the county deed filing, with my name and my mother's name printed clearly in the property owner field. The letter read, "My dear Nadia, if you are reading this, then I am gone and something has happened that made Cecile decide the time was right. I want you to know 3 things. First, your father loved you. He showed it badly and inconsistently, but he loved you, and the deed is the truest thing he ever did for you. Second, your name is on that property because you earned it. Not by being born into this family, but by showing up for it when no one asked you to and nothing was offered in return. Third, when someone tries to take it from you, and I believe someone will, you do not need to fight loudly. You only need to be documented. The truth has already been filed. All you have to do is stand still and let it speak. All my love, always. Odette." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I thanked Cecile Trahan. I drove home, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time without turning the lights on. I want to be clear about what happened in the years between my father's death and the courthouse morning, because it did not happen all at once. It happened the way erosion happens, slowly, quietly, in ways that are easy to dismiss in the moment and only legible when you look back at the whole shape of it. Garrett moved back to Savannah about a year after our father died. He said it was to be closer to our mother. He took the second bedroom in the house on Forsyth Lane. He began driving our mother to her appointments, taking her to church on Sundays, sitting with her in the evenings while she watched her programs. He was attentive in a way he had never been before, and my mother bloomed under the attention the way a plant blooms when it finally gets enough light. I continued to pay the property taxes. I paid them from my own account, as I had been doing since my father's second heart attack, because after his first one I had quietly set up a dedicated account for house expenses and deposited money into it every month. The roof was replaced in the spring after my father died. I hired the contractor, oversaw the work, and paid the invoice, $14,200. I did not tell Garrett. I did not ask for reimbursement. I simply did it, because it needed to be done and I was the one who could see the shape of it. What I did not see, what I should have seen, and what I think part of me chose not to see because it was too painful to look at directly, was what Garrett was doing in those quiet evenings in the house on Forsyth Lane. He was talking to our mother about the future. About what would happen to the house when she was gone. About how it would be simpler, really, if everything were in order. About how Nadia had her own life, her own apartment, her career, and she wouldn't need the house, and wouldn't it make more sense for Garrett to have it, since he was the one who was there, the one who was present, the one who was taking care of things? I know this because my mother told me, eventually. Not in those words, but in the way she began to speak about the house as though it were already Garrett's, mentioning things he planned to do with it, improvements he was considering, as though the question of ownership had already been settled in some conversation I had not been part of. The first time she did this, I was sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday in November, 3 years after my father died. She said, "Garrett is thinking about putting in a new fence out back. He wants to fix up the yard." I said, "That's a nice idea." She said, "He's going to make this place really something when it's his." I looked at her. She was looking at the window. "Mama," I said carefully, "my name is on the deed with yours. You know that." She looked at me then. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly, but something adjacent to it. "Well," she said, "things can always be changed." I did not say anything more that day. But that evening, I went home and opened the file drawer in my desk where I kept the certified copy of the deed and Odette's letter, and I read them both again. Then I made a phone call to Cecile Trahan and left a message asking if we could speak. Cecile called me back the next morning. I told her what my mother had said. "Has anyone approached you about signing anything?" she asked. "Not yet. When they do, and I believe they will, you call me before you respond to anything. Do you understand?" "Yes." Your grandmother was very specific about this, Nadia. She said, and I'm reading from my notes here, "When the time comes, Nadia will be tempted to be reasonable. Tell her that being reasonable is not the same as being right, and that she does not owe anyone her silence about what is hers." I held the phone and felt something warm move through my chest. "She knew me well," I said. "She knew you very well," Cecile agreed. The call from Garrett came on a Thursday evening in September, 14 months ago. He was pleasant. He said he wanted to talk about something important. He said our mother was getting older and they needed to think about the long-term plan for the house. He said he thought it would be best if things were simplified, if my name came off the deed and the property transferred fully to our mother, who could then leave it to him in her will without any complications. He said the word complications the way people say it when they mean you. I told him I would think about it. I called Cecile that same night. "Don't think about it," she said. "There is nothing to think about. You have a legal interest in that property. No one can remove it without your consent, and you are not required to give your consent." "He's going to push," I said. "Let him push. The filing doesn't move. My mother is going to be upset." There was a brief silence. Then Cecile said, "Nadia, your grandmother told me something once. She said that Paulette had always loved Garrett the way you love a flame. You tend it, you protect it, you keep it going because it's bright and warm and it makes you feel like something is alive in the room. She said that love is real. But it is not the same as being right. I wrote that down. I still have the notepad. Garrett called again 2 weeks later. This time he was less pleasant. He said that my mother had already spoken to an attorney and that there were options available to her. He said that I was being selfish. He said that I had never been the one who was there, that I had never shown up for the family the way he had, and that it was frankly embarrassing that I was holding on to a piece of paper as though it made me part of something I had never really been part of anyway. I counted to 7 before I responded. I'll need anything official in writing, I said. Have the attorney contact Cecile Trahan. He hung up. The courthouse morning came on a Tuesday in October. I know it was a Tuesday because I had moved a client meeting to accommodate it, and I remember looking at my calendar and thinking that this was a strange way to spend a Tuesday morning, sitting in a county courthouse watching my brother try to erase me from a piece of paper my father had put my name on. I arrived at 9 a.m. I wore a gray blazer over a dark blue dress and pearl earrings that had been my grandmother's. I carried a leather portfolio with a zipper closure that contained 3 documents: the certified copy of the deed, Odette's letter, and a 1-page summary that Cecile had prepared, dated and notarized, confirming the filing history of the property. Garrett was already there with his attorney, a man named Fowler who had the practiced confidence of someone who had never been wrong in a courtroom and fully expected to continue that record. My mother sat in a chair near the window in a cream cardigan, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the middle distance. She did not look at me when I walked in. Fowler presented the petition. He was calm and methodical. He explained that the property had been in the Beaumont family for decades, that Paulette Beaumont was the primary resident, and that the co-owner listed on the current deed, meaning me, had not lived on the property or contributed to its upkeep in any meaningful way, and that the family wished to simplify the ownership structure in advance of future estate planning. The clerk, a woman named Denise Hollis who had been working in that office for 17 years and who I had spoken to twice on the phone in the preceding weeks, looked at the petition and then looked at her screen. I'm going to need to pull the full filing history on this property before we proceed, she said. Fowler nodded. Of course. There was a silence of about 45 seconds while Denise typed and scrolled. I watched her face. I had learned, over years of working with numbers and documents, to watch the face of the person reading, because the face always tells you when something has changed. Her face changed at the second screen. She looked up at Fowler. Are you aware of a conditional transfer agreement filed with this office on March 14, 2017? Fowler's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. I was not made aware of any such document, no. It's here. Denise turned her monitor slightly so that Fowler could see. Filed by Curtis Beaumont and witnessed by 2 parties. It stipulates that any transfer of ownership interest in this property requires the written consent of both named co-owners. She looked at the screen again. That would be Paulette Beaumont and Nadia Beaumont. Fowler looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at me. I did not look away. I'd like to submit these for the record, I said, and I placed the 3 documents from my portfolio on the counter in front of Denise. My voice did not waver. My hands did not shake. I noticed that. Denise accepted the documents and reviewed them one by one. The certified deed copy. Odette's letter, which she read with a careful expression. The notarized summary from Cecile. These are consistent with what we have on file, she said. Fowler cleared his throat. We may need to revisit the scope of this petition in light of. The petition as filed cannot proceed, Denise said. She was not unkind about it. She was simply clear, the way people are clear when they are reading from something that does not require interpretation. Not without the written consent of both co-owners. If Ms. Beaumont, she meant me, is not consenting, this office cannot process the transfer. Garrett said, "This is ridiculous." I did not respond. My mother made a small sound. I looked at her. She was still looking at the middle distance, but her hands in her lap had tightened, and I could see from where I stood that she was working to keep her face still. Fowler gathered his papers. He said something quiet to Garrett that I could not hear. Garrett said something back. Then Garrett looked at me, and his expression was not anger exactly. It was something older and more complicated than anger, the expression of a person who has spent a long time believing a story about themselves and has just encountered evidence that the story is not entirely true. I looked at him steadily. I did not say anything. We left the courthouse at 9:47 a.m. I know the time because I checked my phone in the parking lot, standing in the thin October sunlight, and I thought about calling Cecile, but I did not call her right away. I stood there for a few minutes and breathed the cool air and looked at the sky, which was the particular pale blue of Georgia in the fall, and I thought about my father sitting at a kitchen table with a notary and a deed and a quiet decision he had made about what was right and then never quite found the words to explain. I thought about Odette at her kitchen table with her coffee and her rice on the stove, watching me add up grocery receipts in my head, seeing the shape underneath. I thought about Sarah Mitchell, who had been my closest friend at Armstrong and who had stood next to me at my father's graveside and driven me home afterward and sat on my couch until 2 a.m. without saying anything much, just being present, which is its own kind of language. I did not cry in that parking lot. But I felt something that I can only describe as the sensation of being held by something larger than yourself. By a decision someone made for you years ago, by a document filed in a county office on a Tuesday in March, by a woman with silver hair and steady hands who had seen what was coming and made sure the ground would hold. I want to pause here for a second, because I think about this often. I think about the people in our lives who do the quiet, invisible work of protecting us. Not the dramatic gestures. Not the speeches. The filing. The notary appointment. The letter tucked inside a wooden box or left with an attorney with instructions about when to deliver it. The people who love us practically, specifically, in ways that take years to understand. If you have someone like that in your life, someone who saw you when others didn't, someone who made a quiet decision on your behalf that you only understood later, I want you to type their name in the comments. Just their first name. I want to honor them. And if you've been watching for a while and you haven't subscribed yet, please do. This channel is built for people who know what it means to be quietly protected and quietly strong. Now, back to the story. In the weeks that followed the courthouse morning, things moved in the way that things move when a truth has been officially confirmed. Not dramatically, but with a kind of steady, unavoidable gravity. Fowler withdrew from the case. He sent Garrett a letter, which Garrett showed me later in a moment of unusual candor, explaining that he could not in good conscience continue to pursue a petition that was contradicted by a recorded filing he had not been informed of prior to taking the case. He refunded half his retainer. Garrett called me 4 days after the courthouse. Not to argue. He called in the evening, and his voice was different, quieter, with something in it that I had not heard before. Something that sounded like a man who has been running a long time and has finally stopped to look at where he is. I didn't know about the conditional agreement, he said. I know. Did you know? Before that day? Yes. A long silence. For how long? 8 years. Another silence. I could hear him breathing. Grandma, he said finally. It was not a question. Yes. She always liked you better. I thought about that for a moment. I don't think that's what it was, I said. I think she saw something that needed protecting and she protected it. That's not the same as liking better. He didn't respond to that right away. Then he said, the money for the roof. And the taxes. Was that you? Yes. All of it? All of it. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, like someone picking their way across uncertain ground. I didn't know that either. I know you didn't. Nadia. He stopped. Started again. I don't think I've been fair to you. I did not rush to reassure him. I let the words sit between us for a moment, because they were real words and they deserved to land properly. No, I said. You haven't. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it right now, I said. You just have to know it's true. My mother took longer. She is not a woman who apologizes easily, and I do not say that with bitterness. I say it because it is accurate, and because understanding it has helped me stop waiting for something that may never arrive in the form I once imagined. What she did, about 6 weeks after the courthouse morning, was call me on a Sunday afternoon and ask if I wanted to come for dinner. Just dinner. No agenda named, no conversation promised. She made red beans and rice, the way Odette used to make them, and she set the table with the good dishes, the ones she only used for company or occasions. We ate together for the first time in months. She talked about her garden and a television program she had been watching and a woman from her church whose daughter had just had twins. I talked about a client I was working with and the weather and the sweet potato pie I had attempted to make from Odette's handwritten recipe and not entirely failed at. We did not talk about the courthouse. We did not talk about Garrett or the deed or the years of property taxes or the roof. But at the end of the evening, when I was getting my coat, she said, Without looking at me directly, your grandmother would have been proud of you. I stood in the doorway of the house on Forsyth Lane, the house with the porch that still sagged slightly on the left side, the house with the kitchen faucet that my father never fixed and that I had finally had repaired the previous spring, and I looked at my mother's profile in the warm kitchen light. I know, I said. She nodded once. And that was all. I drove home in the dark, and I thought about what Odette had said to me once, on a Sunday afternoon at her kitchen table when I was about 14 and had asked her why she always seemed so calm, why nothing seemed to shake her. She had thought about it for a moment, genuinely considered the question the way she always genuinely considered things. Because I know what I know, she said. And I know what I did. When you can say both of those things and mean them, you don't need anyone else's version of events. I am 36 years old. I have a good life, a real one. I have a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Savannah with a kitchen window that gets the morning light. I have a practice of my own now. I left the firm 4 years ago and built something small and solid from the ground up, the way you build anything that lasts. I have Sarah, who still drives over from Augusta for long weekends twice a year and still sits on my couch until 2 in the morning when I need her to. I have Cecile Trahan, who sends me a card every year on the anniversary of Odette's passing and who I think of as one of the finest people I have ever known. The house on Forsyth Lane is still standing. The property taxes are current. The roof is solid. My name is still on the deed. Garrett and I are not close, but we are no longer adversarial. He moved back to Atlanta last spring. He calls occasionally. The conversations are short and careful and honest in a way they never were when we were children, and I have decided that this is enough. It is more than I expected. My mother and I have Sunday dinners now, when I can make it over. She has started teaching me her recipes, not just Odette's, but her own. The pound cake she made when I graduated. The peach preserves she puts up every August. She writes the measurements down for me on index cards in her careful, looping handwriting, and I keep them in a small wooden box on my kitchen counter. I don't know if what we have now is what we could have had all along, or if it is something new, built from the wreckage of what didn't work. I have stopped trying to answer that question. Some things are not meant to be solved, only carried. What I know is this: I did not fight loudly. I did not threaten or accuse or demand. I walked into a courthouse on a Tuesday morning in October with 3 documents in a leather portfolio, and I stood still and let the truth speak for itself. That is all I did. And it was enough, because the truth had been filed 8 years earlier by a woman who loved me practically and specifically and without condition, who saw the shape of things underneath and made sure the ground would hold. If you are watching this and you recognize something in this story, if you have been the one in the doorway, the one who showed up without being asked, the one who paid the taxes and fixed the roof and kept the records while someone else took the credit and the warmth, I want you to know that your quiet work is real. It is documented somewhere, even if only in your own memory. And the truth has a way of being filed in places that outlast the people who would prefer it didn't exist. You do not have to be loud to be right. You only have to be steady. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Tell me one name. Just a first name. Of someone who saw you when others didn't. I read every single one. Hit subscribe if this story spoke to you, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.